12 News Eye on Agriculture with Britton Rucker.
Illinois, the top grower of soybeans in the U.S., faces new challenges as climate change impacts local farmers. What this could mean for you. And we need tips for cattle producers. We talk with K-State's Extension cow-calf specialist to tackle managing stress in the Kansas heat. Good evening and welcome to Eye on Agriculture. I'm Britton Rucker. And this week's extreme heat put Kansas livestock in danger of overheating. Ranchers worried they might lose up to 5% of their cattle in the heat. The Animal Comfort Index from Kansas State University says this week's map of Kansas showed the whole state was in the danger category. Cattle experts say the good news.
This is kind of the heat of the summer. This happens every year, but we have acclimated animals. We do get some nighttime cooling.
And that nighttime cooling was at least to 80 degrees. Tarpoff says that's when cattle release the heat they've absorbed during the day. Concerns over the avian flu prompting some changes at the Kansas State Fair this year. Now, there will still be dairy cattle shows this year, but those showings will need to have extra tests for their animals beforehand. That includes clear milk tests for lactating cows. Those bringing animals from out of state will need to have a certificate of veterinary inspection.
We are implementing some extra hand washing stations and stuff, so if we have fairgoers go in to the dairy area and then maybe, a little further down the road, they're going to walk into the poultry barn, which is where, really the disease is being seen to be terminal, with the poultry.
Now, the last positive case of avian flu in Kansas was in April. As we get closer to the state fair, the situation could change depending on recommendations from the Kansas Department of Agriculture. Illinois is the top grower of soybeans in the U.S., most of which used to feed chicken and beef eaten by consumers. But climate change is affecting local farmers, and that may end up having an impact on shoppers at the grocery store. David Yeomans reports.
About an hour west of Chicago, the pace is a little slower in DeKalb County.
My parents and myself and my wife farm about 2,400 acres of row crops.
That's an area 10 times the size of Millennium Park.
We have some of the best soils in the world.
And no one watches the weather more closely than a farmer.
Honestly, I think I have 5 different weather apps on my phone, and I probably check them over a dozen times a day.
This land has been in the Frieders family for 60 years, and Ryan's father Ronald lives just a few miles down the road.
I graduated in 1970 and basically walked out of high school and started farming with my folks. Weather's always been a challenge, but it seems that it's getting more extreme. Everything's changing. It seems like the temperatures are getting hotter than normal. The water levels are lower than normal.
We're faced with longer periods of a lack of rain, what might be called a flash drought. We're faced with larger amounts of rain at one point in time, whereas we might have gotten an inch of rain, which would be really great. Now we might get 3 or 4 inches of rain in a couple hours. When the spring rains delay us from planting, it affects our entire year of the farm.
These changes are all consistent with last year's National Climate Assessment's expectations for Midwest agriculture in a warming world. Excessive spring rain delaying planting, rapid transitions between flood and drought, and warmer temperatures stressing crops.
And in 2021, that was probably the hardest harvest that I ever lived through. Our crops were flattened.
Worsening thunderstorm wind damage also linked to climate change in a new study.
The changes in the weather are definitely challenges to farm income.
Are these weather changes something that people are talking about in the farming community?
Definitely.
Dr. Michael Langemeyer is a professor of agricultural economics at Purdue University.
I don't know if it's directly impacting what the consumers pay to a large degree yet.
He and his team surveyed 400 farmers nationwide.
We asked farmers about how worried they were in terms of the changing weather patterns. And about 25% were either very worried or fairly worried. And I thought that was a relatively high percent. They don't really talk about what it may be attributed to. They just talk about it as different. And then we've got to think about how we're going to respond to these changes.
A lot of farmers are talking about changes in extremes. Do farmers ever talk about climate change?
The glaciers melting, for instance, at the poles and things like that, those are hard to understand how they relate to us at the farm. But then you see things happening that aren't the same as they used to be, and you you tend to wonder if the things are more related than you ever thought they were.
Meteorologist David Yeomans, CBS News, Chicago.
Still to come, we take you to a community garden for veterans and their families, how they're planting seeds for a better future, next on Eye on Agriculture.
Affordability doesn't mean compromising on quality. Cali is opportunity.
Time to trade in your